federal prosecutor and now president of West Coast Trial Lawyers. It's good to have you back on the programme because we talked to you a lot, of course, during the time when Weinstein was jailed. I want to talk about the use of these prior bad acts witnesses, which can be very effective in these Me Too court cases. It sort of turns testimony from a very difficult he said, she said case into a much more convincing he said, they said case. It's more convincing to a jury. But the appeal court today didn't like it. And I wonder what implications that has for other cases.
That's absolutely right. Even though jury instructions say that the testimony of one victim is enough, there are some jurors that have a difficult time returning a guilty verdict and convicting based on the testimony of one victim. It's easier to reject one victim's testimony than it is to reject several that are essentially saying the same thing. That's why prosecutors like me, when I was a prosecutor, I love these prior bad acts witnesses in sexual assault cases.
Because it paints a character of what was going on around this character at the time.
Yes, oftentimes when people are abusers, whether they're rapists or sexual abusers, they're not just abusing or assaulting one victim. And when other victims come forward, it becomes very powerful and difficult for the jurors to reject. Now, of course, defense attorneys on the other side, they think that this is very controversial and it's not fair, and people are getting charged because of their bad character, not necessarily because of the conduct that's actually charged in the case.
I want you to help me understand, though, the decision of the appeals court today, because as I understood it, trial judges have a fair amount of discretion to decide what is and what isn't allowed in their court. I mean, and clearly sometimes they don't want these prior bad act witnesses in the court because they want them to focus purely on the testimony and the evidence in front of them. But if a judge decides that he is going to admit it, he's the trial judge. Why would the appeals court overrule that?
That's the question that a lot of folks have. Trial judges have a lot of discretion in admitting this type of evidence. They're the ones who put the prior bad act witness on the stand, sometimes outside the presence of the juror, to make sure that it's really similar conduct, similar motive, means, opportunity, similar pattern. And these decisions usually are not disturbed on appeal unless there's an abuse of that discretion. So we had a narrow ruling here today in New York, a 4-3 ruling, but this is not something that you typically see by other appeals courts around the country.
Let's bring in Hilary Rosen. Good to see you, Hilary. I'm glad we've made contact with you. There was a stinging dissent in this case today. Yeah. Judge Madeline Singers, who was in the minority on the bench, she said, this perpetuates outdated notions of sexual violence and it allows predators to escape accountability. What do you think the response of people at large will be to this?
Well, there's an important component here, which is that Harvey Weinstein's defense was really that the sex that he had was consensual. In other words, that she'd agreed to it. And that's why those prior bad actor witnesses were so critical, because he used the exact same tactics against those other women, inviting them up to his room, you know, not taking no for an answer, et cetera, et cetera. So that pattern of behavior was critical to suggest, no, this actually wasn't consensual sex. This was rape and assault. And that if you can't do that as a prosecutor, or what you're really doing is telling every victim, no, sorry, you're going to have to go alone. It doesn't matter.
As Neama says, it also deprives juries of the context that is necessary for them to do their work, doesn't it?
And it's a deterrent for women to come forward, or any sexual assault victims, because if they feel like every trial they go to will end up being a he said, she said, as opposed to working so hard to deal with the character and activities of a serial predator, they're not going to feel very comforted if they're going to be alone every time.
Neama, obviously the district attorney in Manhattan now has a decision to make. He's already put these witnesses through it. It's not easy to give evidence in the box. And he's also got to take into account whether, without all those prior bad act witnesses, he can get a conviction. What do you think he'll be weighing up?
Well, Alvin Bragg has his hands full right now there in New York, obviously dealing with the hush money trial. And now with this, I think he will decide to go forward if the victims want to testify. And this is why. We all know, of course, that Weinstein was convicted in California and he's going to serve 16 years in prison for those rape convictions. But the victims in New York deserve their day in court. And sexual assault is one of the most underreported crimes. Perpetrators are rarely brought to justice. So if you have a high profile individual who has sexually assaulted many women and the victims are willing and able to testify against them, I think that's a righteous case. And I think Bragg will prosecute it.
Peter, I mean, I'm not an expert on the legals here in the UK, but I do know this much, that the number of rape convictions is pitifully small, and one would think that this has implications here as well, doesn't it? If convictions are unsafe because people are giving evidence who aren't connected to the charges, that's going to make it much more difficult for prosecutors.
Yes, I mean, the legal systems are different, but the issues are similar. And the challenges for the legal system in dealing with these very difficult sexual assault, rape cases, this case will be watched very closely. Of course, it's very high profile. It will set a standard, and I think it will be being followed in this country and other places where they're dealing with the same sort of issues through our own legal systems. And you're right. I mean, the levels of conviction for rape and sexual assault are very, very low.
Yeah, indeed so. Neama Rahmani, it's always good to see you. Thank you for coming on the programme again.
No, thank you for having me.
Around the world and across the UK, you are watching BBC News.